Hey listener, thanks for joining us today. You're listening to Pixels and Panels, a show where we take behind the scenes of the comic industry through conversations with your favorite creators and industry leaders. Our guest today is Dirk Vanover, a lawyer with extensive experience in the entertainment sector and in helping protect comic creators. He also authors a helpful blog called comicslawyer.com and has written a book called Comic Startup 101 that's free to read via Amazon Kindle. With Dirk, we demystify what a comic lawyer actually does, talk through why it's important to consult a lawyer as a comic creator, and talk through where you can get legal help, even for free. Hope you enjoyed the listen.
Hey, Dirk, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
And as you may have heard in the intro, Dirk, you're a bit different from a typical guest that we have. Do you mind explaining to our listeners what you do?
I'm an attorney based in the Milwaukee area. I do entertainment, intellectual property, and business law. And my main, I guess, claim to fame in the entertainment space is just working with comic book artists, writers, and occasionally publishers. So I have a bit of a niche knowledge in that area that not, there aren't too many of us that kind of, specialize in that kind of area. So one of probably 5 to 10 that I can think of off the top of my head in the country.
So, what got you interested as a lawyer to focus in on entertainment, IP, and comic book artists in particular?
I knew when I went to law school I wanted to do something entertainment related. Went to law school after dabbling in journalism and public relations for a bit after graduation and going to college. And went to law school kind of knowing I want to do entertainment related something, but didn't really know exactly where that was going to be. Entertainment, intellectual property. Graduated from law school in 2008, which was not a great time to graduate from law school. And eventually found a job working for an online retailer of party supplies and Halloween costumes. So did that, and it was kind of fascinating. Really learned a lot about contracts and things like that. And then eventually, set up my own shop, a solo practice, and I was trying to figure out where I wanted to, utilize these skills. I knew I wanted to do entertainment related stuff. I kind of already knew a decent amount of artists and writers over the years because I've been reading comics actively since the early 90s, reading comics, collecting art, going to conventions pretty regularly. So I already knew quite a bit. Whenever decided to go solo, it just made a natural fit to kind of go with that with people that already knew me and, knew I was an attorney, knew somebody already knew the industry, that I could help them with their issue or their problems they might be having. So kind of just segue pretty easily into it.
What drew you to comics and entertainment? Because obviously there's a bunch of different ways you could apply your law degree. And it seems like you took an interest and went to conventions and really kind of was part of the comic culture. But what drew you to that area?
I think it was just already having the interest in the industry. Like I said, like I was big into comics. I came of reading age in comics. And I really got into it about the time the Image revolution. Image was really starting to take off, and that kind of always stuck with me, the creator-owned stuff. So getting into that, trying to figure out what I'd like to do. Like I really felt like I wanted to work with, independent creators, really looking to protect their, create their own books. Not necessarily, they might want to work for Marvel and DC, but they still want to have the benefit from the fruits of their own labors and really want to create their own stuff. And that made the most sense to me to kind of, apply my skills in that way.
And in terms of what you do for comic artists, how would you describe the services that you provide?
It's a lot of contract negotiation for the most part. It's helping them with agreements with their co-creators if there are any. It's helping them if they're hiring an agent, looking over the agent agreement. If they're looking to have their book published, reviewing the contract with the publisher. That's primarily where it is. A side note with that is if it's, independent creator owned, then I do some trademark work for them as well if they're interested in trademark stuff, kind of in a way to protect their work. So that's it's primarily contractual based, dealing with contracts and helping them review, negotiate, and and that sort of thing.
That's really interesting. And I think one of the things that pops to my head is just what the state of the industry might be like through your lens, because you're seeing the fine print, the details of how different companies or publishers are looking at an individual comic artist. So if you were to kind of look at, the way companies and publishers are approaching comics and comic IP today, what are sort of some themes or trends that you've seen develop over time?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that I see is just more and more publishers wanting to be involved in the media space or media adaptations. It's always been there, but I feel like it's getting very aggressive. Because I prefer it whenever my creators go to a publisher. Like I want the publisher to only publish the book. Would be my ideal thing, and they have no other rights other than the right to publish the book. Now, some of them, they want to be a middleman, where they want to have the right to shop your media rights, and then they're going to take 20% to 50% of whatever they might get for them. On top of that, they're also going to be negotiating a side deal that you're not going to get a cut of, or they're going to try to. Some of them are. It's really that aggressive play into media stuff and media rights that I've noticed over the last. It's been ramping up for a while, but over the last 5 to 7 years, I feel like it's even gotten more aggressive, where they're trying to get more rights and cut you out of like any say you might have any deals and stuff like that, and just trying to attach themselves in some way so that if the project does somehow get adapted into movie or film or TV, that they're going to get a cut.
So it seems like in the past, the old kind of mentality was like, if this thing gets published, we want part of the upside as a company. But it seems like, based on what you're saying, the companies sort of want to get into the agency game of shopping these rights around and participating in all sorts of upside, even if the creator isn't able to partake in that. Is that a fair thing?
Yeah, some of them more of like an agent. Some of them want to be kind of like producers or style themselves as producers, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And in the other thing that you mentioned was creators who might want to be independent, self-publish, own their IP forever. Is that something that you've seen increase as well, or has this increase in interest in comic IP led to more people being willing and open-minded to sell their IP and partner with a bigger publisher?
I don't know. I feel like there are more people now than ever, at least launching their own self-published works. That's one of the great things about the rise of Kickstarter and crowdfunding. Is people can take their idea out there, they can raise the money to help actually, get the money to pay for an artist, writer, whatever it might be, and actually have the money to, do a print run of some books. So to some extent, you're seeing a lot more of that than you would in the past, but there's still that mentality that you're not really in the industry until you've been published by a publisher. So it's always that's going to butt heads with that, because most of those publishers are going to take away your rights to some extent. And you have to, be aware of what you're giving up and whether or not that's worth it to you. Is the publisher giving you money to republish that book or publish that book? If they're not, then how much more reach are they going to get? How many more sales of copies are they going to get that you might actually get money from? Because you're splitting that with them, and the royalties are, there's not a lot of royalties on a lot of those comics. So unless it sells really, really well, you might not get anything. So it's really, you got to weigh the risks, got to weigh the benefits, the rewards. It's not actually always an easy way to make that call, unfortunately, other than, say like, okay, well, I might, this deal might not end up working out for me, but so be it. I'll just take I'll just accept the consequences of that one. But flippantly, if you're going to be involved with the publisher, you're probably going to get screwed over in some way. You don't know when it's going to happen, but it probably will.
I think one thing that springs to mind when you mentioned that is, at least from what I've read, publishers and large companies always have a lot of leverage. And like you said, there's this mentality that if I haven't been published, have I made it as an artist? How do you think their leverage has evolved over time? And I ask that because it seems like they're being more and more aggressive, which leads me to think that they know that there's value in owning IP over long periods of time, and they want to do more and more of this. I'm curious to get your perspective of how you've seen this evolve over the past couple of decades.
I haven't been actively involved in it over the last couple of decades. Probably been over the last 7 years for me. But it's I don't know. Unfortunately, the publishers still have a lot of leverage, just because the only leverage a creator has is to say no. Um, it's good leverage, because you're saying that I don't think what you're offering is worth me giving up my rights to this thing. But it's, if you say no, then your book might not be it might not be published by a publisher. You might not get another offer. So you may have to only stick with self-publishing. So it's difficult to say no for people, even if they're looking at a deal which might not be that great.
What are your thoughts on the rise of these movie studios, streaming platforms? They've obviously created a bigger market. Do you think it's net good for the creator? Is it just different? How do you think about these new players coming in?
It's probably more good than bad, because when there's more outlets for content, it's more likely that a creator might see something they might not have otherwise seen. If it was back in the day when there's 3 TV stations and that's it, you're not going to get a deal. Now that there are so many different channels and outlets, and they'll be more competitive, it can benefit those creators who get those types of deals. But because there are so many, like some of the prices have kind of fallen a little for some of them, and the fact that a lot of them tend to be 1 season, 2 seasons, or shorter, very short, means that they don't have that long run that really can help a creator make money. You're not going to get you don't see too many like Walking Dead, which has been on for 11 years, 10 years, 10 seasons. I don't know. It's like, that's a long time. It's a long time for any show, let alone a show based on a comic book series. So when you see something like that, I mean, that's a nice payday for the creators when something runs that long. Whereas, what was the one that Netflix recently did? Deadly Class, 1 season, one and done. Or was that sci-fi? Actually, might have been sci-fi. Sorry. But, 1 season, that's great. It's great that it got there. It's still going to be some nice money in the pockets of the creators, hopefully. But when you only have 1 season, that's just like, oh, it's done. Our shot's over. It's not going to come back. And, the fact that a lot of these don't have long runs is the downside to it. But, overall, I'd say it's still probably a net benefit. It's a long way of saying that. Overall, probably net benefit, but a good thing. But it's still, when you see some of the deals that people used to get, it's kind of like, ooh, that hurts.
Another thing that has come about, over the past few decades is obviously the rise of social media, and this idea that now anybody can kind of publish things. And, whether it's TV shows or comics, you see people taking content, ripping it, like posting it, making memes out of it. So let's talk a little bit about copyright infringement. Do you think that happens more these days?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of copyright infringement going on out there. And I mean, copyright infringement is tough because it's been a problem as long as the internet's been around for the last like 20 years. But it depends on how you define infringement. Like there's the one issue, which is somebody taking a book, uploading scans of it online and giving away for free. I mean, that's blatant copyright infringement. When you're dealing with memes, it gets a little bit trickier because it could potentially fall under what's known as fair use, depending on how it's being used, what it's saying, and that sort of thing. And they also have, like, sometimes, I shouldn't say don't always, because they can have negative impact, but like they don't really harm the original work that often. But there are still issues with it. Like I know that the one that was going around a while ago, which I still need to watch this documentary because I just found it fascinating, was that Pepe the Frog one with Matt Fury, how his like little frog got co-opted by the right-wing media a bit, and he tried to take action against it, and it was actually successful in suing one of those people whose name escapes me at the moment. Apologies. But generally speaking, if you didn't create it, you just can't take it and use it for whatever you want. It's something people need to remember. But enforcing it online is also a huge problem that even if you might be a copyright infringement, you might be in the right, it's still really hard to enforce it.
Do you see something like that changing anytime soon, or do you think it's just difficult because once it's out there, it's out there, and as you may know, it's really difficult to get one of these platforms to take notice and say, "Hey, like take this down." Or, I mean, there are even examples of artists, claiming that it's fair use, and like you said, it makes it really hard to take things down. So, do you think this is kind of the status quo for a while here?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I would just say that you need to focus on what's, things that are really problematic for you or things that you can actually control. I mean, there are mechanisms to get a lot of stuff taken down. Like if someone is taking artwork you created, putting it on a t-shirt and selling it on Etsy, it's easy enough to get that taken down. But it's also easy enough for that person to create a new account and put it back up. So it becomes whack-a-mole. But there are ways where you can kind of easily get some of that stuff down. If it's actually, harmful to you, you don't want it involved, going on when it's what I'm going to call more obvious copyright infringement. It's difficult to get some of the scans down or stuff of that nature if they're not being hosted in the US, because it's kind of a US based law that you can rely on. It's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which allows you to send notices to a website and tell them this is infringing my content, take it down, and they usually will do so quickly if you're document it and send it properly, send it and make sure it's documented. It'll usually get taken down pretty quick. But yeah, it's going to be a problem. It's always going to be out there. If you have any success, you're going to have to know that it's going to be a problem. You're just going to have to figure out the best way to deal with it and not let it drive you nuts.
How do you think the demand and the just world of comic IP changes? Do you see like people getting more and more interested in comic IP? Do you see it hitting a peak and then fizzling out? Or, how do you think about the role of comics and comic IP in the future?
I hope it just keeps getting more and more interesting, but and people always are going to be interested in it, but it's hard to predict. If you put me on the spot, I would say at some point you're probably going to have it's going to reach a peak and then go back into a valley, but that's just based on historical trends. It seems like every 15 to 20 years, it kind of goes up, then it kind of gets reaches a fallow period, then it kind of goes back up again. So I think we're kind of probably on an upswing right now. But I'm hopeful maybe we won't have as low of a valley as what we've had in the past, because generally speaking, I would say there's probably more readers now than there's ever been with the people reading youth graphic novels, manga, and even the web comics. There's more readers out there than ever before, and it's not necessarily it's not just in the people going to comic shops every day. It's much broader than that. And it's a lot of different type of stuff. So when you look at it, it kind of depends on how you factor in your categories. But I'd say right now, it seems like it's the biggest it's ever been, and hopefully it'll stay that way. But I still think historically speaking, there's probably going to be a bit of a dip, but hopefully it won't be that bad whenever it does arrive.
And we see things like crypto play a massive part in the art community. Now, there are arguments of is this good? Is this something that's actually going to be change the industry and be helpful? What are your thoughts and what have you seen with crypto and NFTs and how that might affect the comic industry?
I don't know it's going to have a major impact just yet. It's still too new of a technology for to be able to determine exactly what its impact is going to be and how it's going to shake out and whether or not it's going to be broadly adopted. Right now there's a lot of issues of, blatant copyright infringement, where people are, minting NFTs of things they don't own, which is a copyright infringement. If I don't own the rights to that work, I can't make an NFT of it. So that tarnishes the industry, which is not a good look. I've found it interesting from a perspective of is it a way where people who've operated primarily as digital artists, is that finally going to be a way where they can get value for their work? Potentially. One of the issues that's always plagued digital goods is it's not really a way to sell it. It's I have the file. Do I own the file? I don't know. Like if an NFT, so like, well, I actually own this file, then I can actually transfer this file. It's been an issue since, the early days of, no, not since the early days, but for the last like 20 years, people have been trying to figure out ways to create a market for digital goods. And, this is one way where you could possibly do it, where it's like, you're trading this item saying that I own this digital good and I can sell this digital good without, an infringement. Because, if I were to take, someone sends me, I don't know, a digital artwork on my computer, and I have a JPEG, and I have it on my computer. And, what can I do with this thing? I can show it on my computer. Okay. But without permission, I can't sell it to someone else, because then I've committed copyright infringement. Because if I have this file and I sell it to someone else, I'm creating another copy somewhere. And so far, the courts have viewed that as being creating another copy of the work, which is a copyright infringement. So, I can't do that. But if I have an NFT stating that I own this thing and I have the right to resell it, that is a way where I can finally unlock value in a digital space. So I find it interesting from that perspective. And if it becomes, broadly adopted in a way where people have, if it can get some legitimacy, people aren't, if people actually view it as a method of actually acknowledging ownership of digital goods, it could be a very good thing, especially for people who create digital artwork these days and aren't making stuff on paper.
What's the thing stopping from crypto being a more meaningful part of writers' compensation? Do you think it's just the adoption and the technology needs to get better over time?
What I've seen has been a few things that people object to in the NFT space. One, which is the environmental concerns, which, appear to be real. I don't really have enough knowledge of my own to be able to adequately address it. But, if you think that, cryptocurrency and NFTs and the like are just horrible for the environment, you don't want to be involved with them, that's your opinion. That's fine. They might be. I do think that from what I've heard is the technology can get better, and there's probably ways to do it where it has minimal environmental impact. So that's, one thing that needs to be addressed. The other is just generally, it needs to have, mature a little bit, either in the eyes of, the users and the other people who view it. Is it actually going to be a space where people are respecting intellectual property? Is one thing. A lot of people are opposed to it because there are just people just trying to make NFTs of anything, and they don't have the rights to it, and it just looks bad on everyone involved. And then finally, it's just, people think it's, is it a scam or not? Obviously, when you see some of the monetary amounts being paid for these things, it's like, wow, how can that be sustainable? So, is it going to normalize? Is it actually going to be something legitimate? It needs to make sure that there's, actual respect for the creators who are being involved. And then it also needs to make sure that it's legitimate as, not fraudulent, which, some people have concerns that it's, money laundering or just fraudulent. Everything in there is fraudulent in that way. So I don't know. I don't have all the answers for that. I find it more fascinating from the legal perspective. Like I was saying, does it create an actual marketplace for digital goods? But there are a lot of issues that would have to be addressed before it probably gets broader adoption.
And is there anything in general that you would want to see in the future of the comic industry? It doesn't necessarily have to be things that you think will even happen in the next 5 years, but things that you would like to see.
Oh, I would love to see creators better compensated, actually getting paid better for the work they do, more respect for the work that they do. And, even with like the media stuff I was talking about earlier, just making sure that they get to go along for the ride. Too often it feels like, I'll see, a adaptation of a comic book, and, the show will have like, oh, executive produced by the publishers of the comic book company, and all publishers' names are all over it. And then at the very end, there might be like in the roll credits, like, oh, based on a comic book by these two people. And it's just like, well, this is their idea. This was their creation. Their name should be all over it. And that type of respect, I would really love to see that come more to the fore, of actually respecting the team that actually creates the work that's being adapted.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people would love to see more of, just respect and the credit due to the people who made the work originally. I I'd also love to move and talk a bit about what you do specifically for individual artists and any advice that you might have for people who might be considering, getting your help. Maybe we can just start by talking about what are the most common mistakes that you see artists make today?
Well, the easiest one is not having someone look over your contract. It's pretty easy to do. I would always have someone, if you're not comfortable doing it yourself, like have someone look over your contract. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Make sure you understand what you're agreeing to, what rights you're giving up, if any. I generally like to say always have a contract in place. There are times when not having a contract can work into your benefit, but it's still best to have it than not. So I would say, make sure you have a contract. If you're working with a creator, let's just, it takes a little bit of time just to talk up front with, whoever your team is, and just make sure everyone's aligned in what you want to have happen.
And what are some of the biggest challenges that you see artists face today from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would say again, it's just getting squeezed on rights. Giving up things that that they didn't want to. Are you giving up, any say you might have in that, like, how long, like if you sign an agreement with a publisher, like, how long is the agreement? When does it end? When can you get your rights back? Because there should be a time when you get rights back. I would never, like, you should not sign anything that just gives them the rights to it forever. You should be able to get it back at some point. Make sure that if there is media stuff involved, make sure you try to, get a say in it, as best as you can. Do you have approvals over anything that might, come your way? Because, you'd like to be able to weigh in on, who's adapting your work and how much money they're paying to do it. So, to just, things that might be, try to make it fair. Read it. I was like, does this fair? Does it sound fair to me? Does it sound fair to you? Then if not, try to make some changes. The worst they're going to say is no. I mean, very rarely will a publisher, if you ask for some changes, they might tell you no, but it's very rare that they would just tell you to, like, no, we're not going to do a deal. Can't say it hasn't happened to me, because it has. At least once I've had a publisher do that to my client, but it rarely happens. Usually they're going to try to work with you to get a deal to happen.
Another thing that you talked about is the importance of co-creators using contacts. Do you mind going a little bit deeper as to how two artists who are working together should think about using a contract?
Yeah, I mean, it's splitting, coming up in the beginning, getting it on paper of, who's being paid what. Is it a straight 50-50 split? Are you doing something different? Does the artist get more money than the writer at first? Then it normalizes, or equalizes somewhere down the road. Like, a lot of ways you can structure the payments. How about ownership? Like, who's going to own this thing? Is it 100% owned by the writer? Is it 50-50 between the writer and artist? Do the colorists, letterers, or anybody else have any, say in it, if there are others? That should be addressed as well. I usually like to have, who gets to make the say about, accepting a publishing contract or doing media rights. Is it equal say? Does one person have more say than the other? What happens if you disagree? Those things should be involved. And then another one, which a lot of people don't consider, is what if one of the people who creates this wants to walk away? What if the writer gets sick of it and then the artist wants to bring someone else on, or vice versa? What if the artist is like, no, I don't want to do this work anymore? How is that going to be handled? There should be a mechanism in that for that person to walk away, and the other person, is if that person's walk away, is the whole thing dead, or can the writer continue? You should try to address that as well, just in case, because it does happen.
In terms of what a writer could get back, I'd love to just understand the benefits that you've seen a writer get or a artist get when they work with a lawyer. How have you kind of materially helped different artists? Like, I guess to give you an example, maybe there was, one, example of a client who wanted to, or a publisher that wanted to buy 20% of an artist's IP for $200,000, and you were able to, like, increase that significantly. I'm just curious what the before and after effects are of getting a lawyer to help you out in some of these negotiations.
Oh man, I wish publishers were throwing $200,000 deals at my clients. I would say, honestly, it's helping make a deal fair most of the time. It's some of that stuff I've talked about where, I mean, the money is the money. Sometimes you might be able to like tick up some an advance if there is one. Sometimes you might be able to get, a slight change in the royalties. But really it's negotiating the risks and, what rights are being given up. So it's, pointing out these things that could trip up a artist or writer that they might not be aware of. Is this a, is there language in there that, you give them this work and then you have to, present your next work to them for the same money. Like, I don't like those deals. I'm going to try to get that out. It's like, this deal is for this deal only. If we want to work together in the future, that's a separate deal. The right stuff is, how much, what are we giving up? Like, how long does this thing last? A lot of publishers don't usually come out a lot of times with, reversion rights in their agreements. So you want to make sure those are in there. So, if, the publisher, goes out of business, I get my rights back. The publisher stops publishing my work, I get my rights back. That sort of thing. Or if it's, limited series, maybe it lasts, X amount of years after the series concludes, just something where it ends. Those aren't always clear. Go ahead.
And when should a young artist reach out to get a lawyer's thoughts or see if a lawyer makes sense?
Usually it's around the time you get an offer, either an offer from a publisher or a contract in hand. If you're thinking about it, just let them know that, like, oh, yeah, you're going to have your lawyer review it. And then reach out to, an attorney who works in the space. If you can find one. If cost is a concern, there's a lot of volunteer organizations that'll, set you up with some attorneys. I think there's like volunteer lawyers for the arts in a lot of cities and states around the country. I work with one out in Chicago occasionally called Lawyers for the Creative Arts. So, if you actually are challenged for money, you can get with one of those people and they can look at it and, put you in touch with an attorney who's willing to work pro bono through the organization.
Did not know about that. And we can take a look and put any links that might be helpful. Is there a national organization or is it run by state usually?
It is not like a national organization I'm aware of. Like, Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts is sort of national. They have a lot of chapters around there, but it can vary by state. So, I'd list a few if you can find them online. I think California might have like a few different ones. But I don't know it off the top of my head, unfortunately. Sorry.
And do you have any general advice for young artists or creators?
Don't be afraid to go it alone sometimes. Especially like for your audience in the webcomic space. It's so easy to do it these days, especially if you have artistic talent. Like, if I had artistic talent and I wanted to do this, man, I would be all over those doing something on the web. Like, I've even thought about it. I don't even have artistic talent. I've thought about doing it because the bar to entry is so low. And then it's so easy to just, get something out there, get going. If you want to have a book, hey, guess what? After a year, collect that stuff in a book. See what your audience looks like. See what, where it's getting you. Then all of a sudden you have a book you can, show people. It's so easy to do that, if you think you might want to do it, just dive in and try to build an audience.
And to close things out, we will move on to our rapid fire round. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So which fictional character best describes your personality?
Oh, man. Superman has always been one of my favorites, but it's got to be probably Clark Kent. I think even in my law school application, I mentioned, I think I actually made reference to Superman and Clark Kent in my law school application. So like Clark Kent's been one for me, even though he's more of a journalist than a lawyer these days. But it's still Clark Kent for me.
I love it. And what 3 comics or fictional piece of work would you take with you on a desert island?
Ooh, man, that's tough. There's so many good ones out there. Like, off the top of my head, I'd probably want to collect, Let me think about that. Let's come back to that one. Sorry.
Yeah, we could come back, definitely. If you could have dinner with any creator of a comic book or fictional work, who would it be and why?
I mean, honestly, I'd still love to meet Jack Kirby. He passed away before like I ever had a chance to meet with him. So if it's dead or alive, it'd be Jack Kirby, just because of the impact he had on the comic book industry and the stuff he helped create.
What's your favorite scene from any comic that you've read in your life, or when you think about a comic scene, what pops into your mind?
Right now, the one that pops into my head is just like probably because it's a little bit more recent, of a recent vintage, that I just found really funny. Was, and I don't even read that much Batman, but I happened to pick up one of Tom King's issues when he was leading up to like the Batman Catwoman wedding, and there was a scene where they were going on a double date with Clark Kent and Lois Lane, and then they end up like dressing as each other's alter egos, and it just cracked me up, the whole sequence, like at a fair, and everything about that just cracked me up, and it's been one of my favorite scenes in probably the last like 5 years in a comic. But there's so many other good ones that I feel bad picking one from DC, but for some reason that one just always pops into my head as just being an amusing scene.
I need to go check that out. And then finally, if you could have dinner with a fictional character, who would it be?
Ooh, dinner with a fictional character. I actually may have to go She-Hulk. That could be interesting. At least like lawyer style She-Hulk. That could be kind of fun.
Yeah, that could be great. Well, Dirk, thank you so much for taking some time, and thanks for just doing what you do and helping comic artists understand, how they can get a fair deal. I know I'm sure a bunch of the clients that have worked with you have found it really helpful, and I hope our listeners are encouraged to reach out and get the help that they need as they enter contract negotiations or anything like that. But thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any feedback or want to be featured as our next guest, please write to us at pixelsandpanelspod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, like, or give us a 5-star rating. See you all next week.